The wind howled through the broken metal and ash as fire burned across the sky, and the last human soldier moved like a ghost through the wreckage of a fallen world. He had no name anymore, only a call sign burned into his helmet and his skin. He was not fighting for victory now, only for survival. The rest of his squad was gone, taken by the enemy or the cold silence of space. He kept walking through the dead city, once full of life, now just dust and shadows. His boots crunched over glass and bone as he checked each corner for movement. His gun was low on power and his armor was cracked, but he still walked. He had learned to move without making sound, learned to breathe slow and quiet, learned to trust nothing and no one the war had taken. Everything from him, family, friends, even hope. He passed a rusted sign written inhuman letters. A memory flashed in his mind, laughter, music, children playing. He shook his head and kept going. A sound made him stop. It was not the sound of metal or gunfire. It was soft, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. He crouched low, listening. There it was again. A cry not loud, not strong, but real. A cry for help. He moved fast, but careful toward the sound. Every step could be a trap the enemy was known to use. Tricks to lure survivors out, but something about the voice made him move faster. He reached the broken ship, half buried in rubble. Smoke curled from its engine, and one wing was snapped like a broken arm. He heard the cry again, this time clearer inside. He raised his weapon and climbed into the ship. Dark inside, metal twisted sparks flew from a broken panel. Then he saw her. She was small and thin, curled up behind a metal crate. Her skin was pale, not human, her eyes wide, glowing with fear. She wore no armor, no weapon, just a torn cloak and a bracelet with strange symbols. He aimed his weapon at her enemy alien, one of them. He should pull the trigger, end it now, but she didn't move to fight. She didn't scream. She just looked at him with eyes full of something strange, not hate, not anger, just fear and pain. She tried to speak, her voice cracked and weak. Please, she said, her words broken but clear. Please don't. Didn't lower his weapon. He stepped closer. Who are you? He asked. She looked down, then back at him. Her hand shook as she reached for her bracelet and pressed a small button. A soft light blinked, and a hologram appeared. A map. A symbol, and then her face, but wearing a crown. He stared. He didn't understand. She said another word, princess. His eyes narrowed. A trick, maybe, or the truth. She didn't look like a fighter, didn't look like someone who had taken part in killing his people. She looked lost, alone like him. He looked around the ship. No guards, no soldiers, just her, wounded, afraid, and hiding. He asked why she was here. She said she escaped, didn't want the war, didn't want to follow orders. To kill, said her father started it. Said she ran when she saw what was happening to the humans. He didn't know what. To think, could she be telling the truth, or was this another way to get close to him? But if it was a trap, why was she alone? Why was she crying? He looked at her again, then heard something outside, a noise, footsteps, more than one. Enemy soldiers. He backed away from the door and looked at the princess. She looked at him with wide eyes. Please, she whispered again. He knew he had no reason to help her, no reason to trust her, but he also knew he couldn't let them take her, not yet, not before he knew the truth. He moved fast, pulled her up. She stumbled. He caught her arm. Stay quiet, he said, follow me. They moved through the back of the ship. He used old tunnels and hidden paths, places only human soldiers knew. She followed without question. No sound, just the soft echo of their breath. They hid in a collapsed building, watched as the enemy searched the area. But they didn't find them. Not this time. As night fell, the soldiers sat against the wall. The princess rested nearby, watching the stars. Neither spoke, but something had changed. He didn't trust her yet, but he didn't leave her behind either. And she didn't run for the first time in a long time, the last. Human soldier didn't feel alone, and that scared him more than the war ever did. Asterisk. The night was cold and silent, but his thoughts burned louder than fire as he watched the strange girl sleep beside the wall. Her face was calm, but her hands were still shaking. Even in rest, he had seen enemies' fake weakness before, but this felt different. There was no armor, no weapon, no trick in her voice. She looked broken, like someone who had seen too much too fast. He sat in the shadows, gun in his lap, eyes wide open. Sleep was dangerous, trust was worse. Still, he had helped her. Why? He didn't know, maybe because when she cried it reminded him of someone he used to care about, maybe because she hadn't begged for her life. She had begged for something deeper, mercy, forgiveness. Peace. Morning came, soft light broke through. The cracks above the girl opened her eyes and looked at him. She didn't flinch. Didn't speak, just stared like she was waiting to see what kind of man he was. He asked her again, "Who are you really?" She didn't speak right away. She sat up slowly, hands raised so he wouldn't feel threatened. Then she touched the bracelet. Again, it glowed faintly. This time the image was clearer. Her face, her name, a royal symbol. He recognized the mark. It was the same one painted on the ships that had burned. Earth's skies. He stood frozen. This girl, this quiet, soft girl, was a princess of the enemy. She looked at him and said words that cut deep. I didn't want this war. He wanted to yell, to scream, to ask, why then? Why had her people killed so many? Why? Had they turned Earth into ash? Why had they hunted every human across the stars? She saw the fire in his eyes and lowered her head. My father said your kind was dangerous. He said we had to stop you before you spread. He told us lies, but I saw the truth. When I came to your world, I saw what we did. I saw the pain, and I couldn't stay silent. So I ran. He didn't believe her. He couldn't. But something in her voice felt like truth. Still, truth didn't change facts. Her father was the emperor. And she was his daughter. She asked if there were any more humans. He stayed quiet. She already knew the answer. He was the last soldier, maybe the last human. The thought stabbed him harder than any blade. Noise made them both jump, not enemy soldiers. This time, but a drone, a small flying scout with blinking lights. It hovered in the distance, scanning, then it moved. Fast, straight toward them, he grabbed her hand and pulled her to her feet. They ran across broken ground as the drone chased them. He fired one shot and hit it in the wing. It spun out and exploded against the wall. Too close, too loud. Others would hear. They had to move. They fled through twisted streets and empty tunnels. She followed without slowing. No complaints, no questions. She trusted him, and that confused him even more. After an hour, they stopped behind an old factory, breathing heavy, hands on knees. He looked at her again. She didn't look like a princess now, just a girl, a tired, scared girl, trying to make things right. Asked why she came alone. She said she wanted proof. She wanted to see what her people had done, and she had more than enough. She looked at him and said something he never expected. I need your help. He laughed, not loud but bitter. You want the last. Human to help the enemy princes. She didn't back down. She said if she could get to the rebel signals, she could show them what she saw. Tell them the truth, help them rise, help stop the war. She said they wouldn't believe her alone, but with him. A living human, they might listen. He looked away. The idea was insane, dangerous, maybe hopeless, but what did he have to lose? He was already dead to the world. If he died helping end this war, maybe it would mean something. He asked what her real name was. She told him it was soft and simple, not a name made for war, but for peace. He didn't tell her his name. He had almost forgotten it, but he said she could call him Soldier. They sat for a moment, both knowing what they were about to do. The Empire would hunt them. The rebels might shoot first and ask later. They were not friends, not allies, but something was starting between them. Something hard to name. He stood and held out his hand. Let's go, then, princess. She took it without fear, Teve. They stepped into the ruins, two enemies now walking the same road. Not for power, not for glory, but maybe, just maybe, for peace. The sky burned above them as the sound of marching echoed through the shattered streets, and the soldier kept his grip tight on the princess's arm as they ran through smoke and shadows. Behind them, the drone's last signal had gone out, and now the enemy would come looking, and they would bring more than scouts this time. The princess struggled to keep up her breath, short and her legs trembling, but she did not ask him to stop, and she did not fall. He had to admit that surprised him. She was not trained for this, not built for it, yet she kept running. The soldier turned sharply down a broken alley where a half-buried door lay hidden behind rubble. He slammed his shoulder into it, and it creaked open just enough for them to squeeze. Through inside, it was dark and smelled of rust and dust. They were inside an old tunnel system, one that used to move goods under the city before the war. The walls dripped with water, and the lights flickered weakly, but the soldier knew these tunnels. He had used them once to escape a losing fight. Now they would use them again. They moved fast with low footsteps echoing around them, and every sound made his finger twitch near the trigger. He glanced back at the princess who followed close and quiet. He still did not know if he trusted her, but he had no time to doubt now, not with death following their steps. The tunnel split in two, and the soldier hesitated. Left led to the old market ruins. Right led to the lower bunker zone. Neither was safe, but one had a better chance. He turned right, and they climbed down a rusted stair. At the bottom was a chamber full of broken crates and shattered screens. It had once been a checkpoint now. It was a graveyard of metal. He pulled her down behind a fallen wall, and they rested for a moment. Her face was pale and covered in sweat. She whispered that she heard something, and he listened Boots' voices. The enemy was already in the tunnels. He grabbed her hand again and pulled her deeper into the darkness. They moved through narrow vents and narrow halls. Some places so tight she had to crawl. Her cloak caught on a jagged pipe and tore. She didn't complain, just kept going. Finally, they reached a sealed door. He punched in an old code, and the lock buzzed once. The door opened into a wide chamber with thick walls and silent machines. They had found an old supply room. He sealed the door behind them and dropped his bag on the floor. The room was safe for now, at least safer than outside. Princess sat down on a crate, breathing hard. Her eyes met his. She asked why he was helping her. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he checked the room for threats. Then he sat across from her and said he wasn't sure. Maybe he just got tired of being alone. Maybe he wanted answers. Maybe part of him still believed in something more than war. She looked at him and said she had seen what her people did to Earth. She had seen the camps, the bombs, the fire raining from the sky. She said she never wanted it to happen, that she had begged her father to stop, but no one listened now. She had escaped, not to hide, but to find someone who still had a voice, someone who could speak to the rebels and tell them what was coming. He asked what was coming. She said her father was planning something worse than war, a weapon. Not just to wipe out humans, but to wipe out any race that resisted. Soldier felt cold inside. He asked how she knew. She said she had seen the plans and she had stolen part of them before she ran. She pulled out a small device from her cloak. He scanned it with his eyes and saw a map, a schedule, a list of test sites. It was real. She had risked everything to bring it. The room shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. They were bombing the tunnels. No more time. They had to move. He helped her up and opened the back door. There was a ladder leading up to the street level. He climbed first, then helped her follow. They came out in the middle of a burning district, firelit. The sky buildings crashed in the distance. The enemy was everywhere. But they didn't see the two shadows slipping through the smoke. They ran again, from wall to wall, from ruin to ruin. His armor took a blast, and he stumbled. She screamed his name and helped him up. Her hands were soft but strong. She didn't leave him behind. Made it to the edge of the city. Beyond the broken walls was the dead zone, open land with no cover, but also no patrols. He looked at her. She looked at him. No words were needed. Together, they ran into the ash and dust, two figures fleeing fire, a soldier with nothing left, a princess with everything to lose, and behind them the war burned hotter than ever. Asterisk. The wind screamed across the dead zone as dust blew in. Sharp waves, and the sky above was gray with smoke and sorrow. The soldier led the princess through the wasteland, with his steps slow but sure, and his eyes always searching. They had traveled for hours with no food and no rest, but he knew they were close. He could feel it like a memory carved into his bones. The ground began to change beneath their boots, metal plates half buried in dirt, rusted wires peeking from cracked stone, signs of something old and forgotten. He stopped at a narrow hill and brushed aside loose rocks, revealing a metal hatch marked with a faded human symbol. The princess leaned in and stared at it as if seeing something sacred. The soldier entered a code from memory, and the hatch hissed open. Darkness greeted them. As they climbed down the cold ladder, the air was thick and heavy with silence. He reached the bottom first and helped her down. His flashlight cut through the black, showing walls lined with dust and old gear. This was one of the last human outposts. A base built in secret during the early days of the war. He had trained here, once laughed here, lost friends here. Now it was a tomb. They moved through narrow halls past broken panels and shattered screens. Everything was dead, power low, systems cold. But the structure still stood. In the control room, he found an old generator and after some time managed to bring it to life. Lights flickered weakly and machines buzzed with tired energy. The base was awake again. The princess moved slowly through the room, running her fingers across dusty consoles and blinking lights. She stopped in front of a wall lined with photos, faces of soldiers, smiles from a world that no longer existed. She touched one of the images and whispered an apology. The soldier activated a terminal, and old recordings played. Voices filled the air, reports from officers, warnings about enemy ships, final messages to loved ones. The princess listened, and her face changed, no longer just sad, now full of guilt. She turned to him. and said she never knew it was this bad that her people had hidden the truth. They said humans were monsters. But the recordings told a different story, a story of families and dreams and bravery, a story of people who never wanted war. The soldier watched her carefully. He had heard enough lies in his life, but the pain in her eyes was not a lie. She was seeing the war now not from a throne, but from the ashes. She told him more about the weapon, said it could erase cities in seconds, said her father planned to use it on the last rebel strongholds. He asked where the weapon was. She said it was hidden in a secure zone near the core worlds. He knew that meant they had little time. Suddenly a warning light blinked on the console, motion detected. Near the surface, they were not alone. Shut off the lights and guided her into a narrow maintenance tunnel. They moved fast but quiet. Behind them, footsteps echoed down the metal halls. Not many a scout team. They reached a hidden door behind storage crates. It opened into a supply chamber filled with old weapons and gear. He handed her a small scanner, taught her how to use it. Ben took a rifle and slung it over his shoulder. They stayed in the shadows until the footsteps passed. He peeked out and saw the soldiers moving through the halls, scanning and marking locations. They were mapping the base, preparing for something bigger. He turned to the princess and whispered that they needed to go. Now they exited through a vent that led to a cave. Behind the base, once used for secret drops, now forgotten, they climbed over rocks and slid through cracks until they reached the open land again behind. Then the base returned to silence, a ghost waiting to be found again. They rested under a broken arch far from the base. The princess sat beside him, her cloak wrapped tight. She looked up at the stars and asked if any humans were still out there. He said maybe he had heard rumors, whispers, and static. Ships hiding near asteroid belt signals with strange codes. Or said if they could reach one of those signals, she could show them what she had seen, tell them the truth, warn them about the weapon. He looked at her and saw something new in her eyes. Not fear, not sadness, but fire. The fire of someone who wanted to fight, not for power, not for a throne, but for life. He nodded slowly and stood up. They had a path, now a reason, a goal. He reached out his hand again. She took it without pause, and together they stepped into the dark, not just running now, moving with purpose to find the signal to stop the weapon, to change the war before it burned the last star in the sky. The cold winds of the wasteland howled behind them as a soldier, and the princess climbed the rocky slope toward a peak wrapped in clouds and silence. The air was thin and sharp, but the signal tower stood tall above the cliffs, its metal body. Leaning with age and storm, but still alive, the soldier had found it once during an old mission, long before the sky turned black and the ground turned red. Now it was their only chance. The princess followed close behind, her boots slipping on loose stone, but she never stopped. Each step brought them closer to the edge of everything, to the line between silence and truth. Between death and a new beginning, they reached the tower's base just as the sun began to fall behind the black mountains. The soldier touched the door panel and entered a code. The door groaned open, revealing a narrow stairwell lit by flickering blue lights inside. The tower smelled like dust and cold metal. They climbed to the top in silence at the highest level. The soldier found the control station wires hung from the ceiling, screens cracked but blinking. An old transmitter blinked with a weak red light, waiting for someone to speak. The soldier began fixing the systems. His hands moved fast from memory. He reconnected. Wires rerouted, power cleared, dust from old panels. The princess stood nearby, watching him with wide eyes, her fingers gripping the data device she had carried since her escape. She asked if it would work. He said he did not know, but it had to. They had no other place left to try. After an hour, the screen flashed green. The tower hummed, the transmitter sparked to life. He looked at her and nodded once. She stepped forward and placed her data device into the main port. A soft light spread across. The console images appeared on the screens, her father's face, explosions, maps. The weapon, everything she had stolen, everything they had risked their lives for. Soldier turned on the recorder and stepped back. The princess stood still for a moment, then closed her eyes and began to speak. She spoke slowly and clearly, telling her people everything, that the war was built on lies, that the humans had never planned to attack, that the fire her father had started was burning everything, that the weapon he now prepared would not stop with rebels, that it would destroy whole worlds, even those who obeyed him. She said her name, not just her title. She told them she had seen Earth, had walked its ruins, and heard the last voices of its people. She said the humans did not deserve extinction. They deserved to live to be heard to fight back. Ben the soldier stepped forward and spoke too. He said his name slowly, as if pulling it from a grave. He said he was the last, but not for long. He said humanity was still alive in the dust and the stars and every signal left behind. He said this was not a cry for help, it was a call to rise. To fight the lies, to break the chains. They finished the message and sent it out across the stars to every hidden rebel. Sell to every listening ear, to every frightened soul waiting for a reason to hope again. The screen blinked. Transmission sent, then the tower shook. The soldier grabbed the princess and pulled her down. Outside ships appeared in the sky, enemy ships. Vast and black with sharp lights, they had found them. Soldier grabbed his rifle and pushed her toward the stairwell. He told her to go down. To escape through the hatch below the tower, she refused at first, but he shouted again, and she finally moved. He stayed back and aimed at the door. It burst open with a flash, and metal soldiers rushed in. He fired. One fell, then another, but they kept coming. He backed away slowly, his foot touching the edge of the stairwell. Then he turned and followed. Her down, they reached the base level and ran into the woods beyond the cliffs. Laser fire cut through the air, trees burned, the ground shook, but they kept running, not just for their lives, but for the message they had sent. They found a cave and hid. Inside, wet and cold, but hidden, the princess looked at him and asked if it would be enough. If the message would reach someone. He looked out into the darkness and said it had to. He believed it. He had to. Outside, the wind roared and fire lit the sky. But deep in that cave, they sat close, two fugitives, two voices that had spoken truth, and somewhere out there, someone was listening, asterisk. The cave walls trembled with every blast outside, and the sky was full of fire and metal, screaming through the clouds. The soldier pressed his back to the rock, his weapon low and breath steady, as he listened for the enemy. The princess knelt beside him, her eyes wide, but her hands calm. They both knew it would not be long now. The transmission had gone out. Their message had reached the stars, but it had also drawn the fire. A sharp hiss came from the air above a scout drone. The soldier stood and fired, but the blast missed. The drone blinked red and disappeared into the smoke. They had been marked within minutes. The ground shook again, dropships, big ones, carrying soldiers in heavy armor. He looked at the princess, and she nodded without fear. They moved from the cave into the trees, using the shadows and smoke to hide the forest burned around them. But they ran anyway. Branches cracked under their boots. Heat pressed against their skin. And still they ran. Suddenly a sharp hum filled the air. A stun charge, too late to move. Blast hit them, and the world spun. He woke in chains. The room was cold and white. With a light too bright above his head, his armor was gone, his weapons too. The air smelled like metal, and blood. Across from him stood a figure he had never seen in person, but knew well from images. The emperor, the face of the war, the hand that had crushed Earth, the voice that had ordered the silence of entire planets. The emperor looked at him with eyes that did not blink. He spoke with no anger, only command. He asked where the princess was. The soldier stayed silent. 2 guards entered and dragged the soldier to another chamber, cold walls, metal floor, a screen on one wall. And behind it, the princess. She was chained as well, her cloak torn. But her eyes were still clear and strong. She looked at the soldier and smiled. Then the guards hit her. But the soldier struggled, shouted, but his chains held him in place. Emperor's voice filled the room again. He said she would die for her betrayal. Said the weapon would still launch. Said one message would not stop a war built on fear and control. The soldier closed his eyes and listened not to the emperor, but to the sound in the wall. The faint hum of a power relay, old, weak, breakable. He remembered the maps of these ships, where the relay lines ran, where the locks were weakest. When the guards stepped away, he twisted his arm just enough to hit the lock on his wrist. Pain shot through him, but the chain snapped. He lunged forward and slammed his shoulder into the first guard, grabbed the weapon and fired once. The second guard fell. He ran to the panel and opened the door between him and the princess. Her chains were tighter. He shot the locks free and caught her before she could fall together. They moved through the corridors. Alarm screamed. Lights turned red. Doors locked behind them. They found a service hatch and climbed down into the lower levels. The ship shook around them, either from battle outside or from rising panic inside. They Reached an escape pod chamber, only one left small, but working. He pushed her inside, but she refused. To leave him, he said she had to. Said the message she carried mattered more than anything else. Said if she reached the rebels, they could still stop the weapon she touched his face and whispered that she would come back for him. He sealed the pod and hit launch. He disappeared into the stars. The doors burst open and more soldiers rushed in. The soldier raised the stolen weapon and fired. He did not expect to win. He only needed to hold them long enough. Every second was a victory outside the pod. Streaked across the stars inside it, the princess watched the warship fade behind her, tears in her eyes, but fire in her heart. She had seen courage, seen truth, seen a human give everything for peace. Now she would carry that fire to the rebels. Now she would carry his fight. The last soldier stood alone in the smoke, but he did not fall with fear. He stood as a wall between darkness and light, as the one who would not kneel, captured, yes, defeated, never. The stars burned above a shattered world as rebel ships moved like shadows between broken moons and dust rings. Waiting, listening, watching, far from the old empire's strongholds, a new force gathered. Not vast, not polished, not perfect, but angry. Awake, alive in the center of it stood the princess, her voice calm, her hands steady, her eyes full of fire as she spoke before the rebel council. She told them everything again with no tears and no fear. She showed them the message, the map, the weapon. She told them about the last human soldier, the one who had risked everything. Not for revenge, but for a chance at peace. Some doubted, some whispered, some shouted that it was too late. That the war could not be turned, that the Empire's weapon would burn everything before anyone could fight back. But others stood, others listened, others remembered the voice and the message. The fire in his eyes, the truth in his words, and slowly the council rose with her. The rebels moved fast through hidden routes and quiet channels. Their spies fed them the location of the final test site. A dead moon turned into a launch base where the weapon waited beneath the surface, humming with silent power. The princess led the fleet not from behind, but from the front. She wore no crown, no robe, no armor, only a plain flight suit and the memory of a soldier who had given her courage. As the fleet jumped into orbit, the base lit up with fire. Defense towers spun and fired. Enemy ships rose from the ground. The battle began, but the rebels did not fall. They struck hard, precise, focused while the fleets clashed above the surface. The princess landed near the weapons control tower with a small strike team. They moved through tunnels while alarms screamed in walls. Shook in the heart of the base, they found the control chamber, and inside it, the emperor stood tall, surrounded by guards and machines. His voice cold as he called her by name and asked why she had returned. She said she came to finish what he started. Not with fire, but with truth. The emperor raised his hand, and the guards moved, but the rebels were faster. Blasts filled the chamber, screams echoed. The princess moved through the chaos and reached the console. The weapon was ready to launch target. Coordinates locked. She saw cities, colonies, names of people she would never meet. She reached for the shutdown code, but it needed a second key. The emperor had eye, laughed and said she would never get it, that he would rather die than let the weapon be stopped. She looked at him, then stepped forward, unarmed, unflinching. She said he had already lost, that fear no longer ruled the stars, that his lies had burned away, and that even if he killed her, the truth would live on. He raised his weapon, aimed at her heart, then a blast came from the shadows. The soldier stepped out of smoke and fire. Alive, scarred, but standing, the room froze. He said nothing, just walked forward. Took the emperor's key from his stunned hand and placed it in the console together. They shut the weapon down. The alarm stopped. The lights dimmed outside. The empire's fleet began to fall. One by one, its ships turned, its soldiers stood down. The war did not end in fire. It ended in silence later on a quiet hill under a rising sun. The soldier stood with the princess, looking out at the stars. They said nothing at first, then she asked if he was ready to go home. He looked at her and said this was home, now where people stood for each other, where truth won over power, where a human soldier and an alien princess had changed the galaxy with one shot, and the stars kept burning, not with war but with hope.